Hello, my name is Dominic, and you're watching the All-American Casino Guide, a channel dedicated to providing you with all the tips, tricks, tutorials, and trivia you need to know about casinos and casino games. In this video, I'm going to be talking about body language and how that affects your poker game. Terms and conditions apply, of course. For example, when you're playing online, there is nobody in the poker room with you, so you won't be able to read their body language because there is no body. Before we get too much into it, I want to remind you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the channel, because it's the only way that we can grow the channel and make sure that we can keep making videos for you. Every week we upload videos with fresh tips to help you play casino games smarter, and so you can win more money. You're either watching this video right now because you have some troubles controlling your expressions and nervous tics, maybe someone's been telling you have a bad poker face, or you want to get ahead of the game by taking your opponent's body language into account before you decide on your next poker move. Eyes, mouth, voice, heartbeat, hands, even your whole body can react to whatever is going on in your mind. When you play poker, do you bite your lip? Do you blush when you can't quite get your poker face on? Or do you do something else that gives it all away? In this video, I'll go through some of the visible and audible signs that you can pay attention to in your own gameplay, and of course, of your opponents. So the first thing I want to talk about is eyes. So let's talk about them. Eyes can be very expressive, and it's a very good starting point to analyze your opponent and their body language. For example, what direction are their eyes looking towards? Does the blinking action seem normal? Do the muscles around the eyes tell us anything in particular? Unless the players at your table have that perfect poker face, the answer is yes, the eyes tell us something. And a player who knows their poker face sucks or can't be bothered to keep it up choose to wear sunglasses to hide their eyes, the windows to the soul. When it comes to the eyes, there are two main factors that we're going to want to take into account that might give us a slight edge in any given hand. The first is the idea of gaze direction. Where is our opponent's eyes looking, and how fast are these glances occurring? By watching our opponent's eyes carefully, we're often going to see them make quick glances in one particular direction, at the board, at their chip stack, at our chip stack. And all of these glances carry some kind of meaning. For example, our opponent might immediately glance at our stack after seeing the turn card, because maybe they caught some big hand after that card was turned out, and they want to know if we have them covered if they decide to go all in. Sometimes the absence of a look in a certain direction can also be telling. For example, our opponent is stoically not checking their hole cards for the entire hand, even though we typically have seen them checking them regularly. The second thing to consider is fearful eyes. It's usually possible to detect fear along with a range of other emotions. Fear causes the pupils to dilate. Of course, we're still going to need to know what that fear actually means. Often our opponent is thinking about bluffing or holds a strong hand, but sometimes it can mean something entirely different, like too many headache pills, the presence of alcohol or drugs, for example. Finally, after our opponent has made a bet, they generally have two choices. The first is to gaze off into space, trying to not give any information at all. And the second is to make deep eye contact with us. Again, neither of these carries an implicit meaning in their execution, but if your opponent typically employs option 1 and then suddenly switched to option 2, there is a very good chance there is something that can be interpreted from the meaning. And perhaps he is staring us down as part of some sort of intimidation tactic. And I say let him. After the eyes, the mouth is probably the most telling area of the body that we as players can look at and interpret what something's going on in their body language. Some players believe the mouth is an even more significant tell indicator than the eyes. Look out for the following. For example, nervous lips. Relaxed lips are generally full and rounded. Tense lips are more likely to be thin and pinched. Once we figure out what this means in the case of an individual opponent, we'll have an excellent tell indicator. The second thing to consider when it comes to the mouth is twitches and micro-expressions. It takes a lot of skill to conceal thoughts and feelings leaking through our faces. Sometimes our true feelings are displayed on our face for only a fraction of a second before we can get them under control. and this small break in control can give away everything. We've referred to these as micro-expressions or perhaps even twitches. These small movements are easy to miss but carry large amounts of information when spotted. The next thing I want to talk about in respect to body language is an idea of heartbeat. Our pulse is always there, trust me. With big bucks though on the line in a game of poker, you can really get your blood pumping and your heart rate up. If your opponent is running a big bluff, naturally their heart rate is going to increase during these moments. The good thing for them and you is that their heart rate is typically rather imperceivable. Am I right? If you're not a samurai warrior who can control your pulse, chances are that you're going to be as transparent as a plastic spoon that's been degrading for the last 50 years. Don't get me wrong though, it's going to be incredibly hard to spot an increased heart rate. It takes a trained eye and one of my videos to truly understand what you're looking out for. It's worth looking out for the following: increased breathing, a visible heartbeat through thin clothing such as a t-shirt, a pulsating vein on the neck or temple, and symptoms of high heart rate such as a trembling hand or quivering voice. So think about for a second the type of scenarios that you might get involuntarily excited as a player. It's usually not when you're holding some dull, mid-strength hand. It's typically when we have a big hand or we're thinking about running a big bluff. We're going to begin to learn what exactly that means for different players as we go further on in this explanation. Now, while not technically part of body language, something that needs to be looked out for is the idea of voice. And so one of the things that we should be paying attention to with our ears instead of our eyes. So something to be considerate of. The first being quality of the voice. How did their voice compare to the beginning of the hand when they had a relaxed position before cards were actually dealt? It's often possible to get some handle on your opponent's mental state through their tone of voice. Are they nervous? Are they mad? Are they angry? Are they fearful? These are all things we can pick up in the tone of the voice. The next thing is, when does your opponent actually vocalize? The decision to talk can be a tell in itself. Remember that we are not actually required to speak at any point at the table. We can make all of our actions at any poker table with just chips and gestures. And we certainly don't need to involve ourselves in table talk. For example, if our opponent is always vocalizing, they're really chatty at the table, but then suddenly they start acting very silent, instead choosing to tap the table, slide the chips, what exactly does that mean? Obviously something has changed recently to warrant this change in behavior. Inversely, if our opponent rarely talks but is trying to start talking us up all of a sudden during a big river pot, what does that mean? Does he like to do that when he has strong or weak hands? We address our opponent on the river to see if he chooses to respond. We try to gauge him based on the quality of his voice and the content of what he is saying, and this will give us some information about if they in fact have the winning hand. This technique is known as speech play. It can reveal a lot of information, but is generally considered poor etiquette when it's overused. So be careful how you use it at the table. You don't want to be that guy. The next part of the body we want to talk about with respect to body language is the hands. We might think initially to look at whether our opponent's hands are shaking or not, and this decision is undoubtedly a good one. But we have already covered this in the heartbeat section. The hands can convey information in a range of other ways though. Like for example, handling chips. It's often worth noting how an opponent puts chips into the pot by default. Do they, for example, slide them in gracefully? Or do they thrust them in forcefully? Do they ever splash the pot? Whether intentional or not, this will tell us something about their particular strength of hand. Sometimes players subconsciously or consciously make their bets in different ways. Shoving the chips forcefully while even partially splashing the pot could be considered an intimidation tactic, hoping to elicit a fold. Then again, as we have probably realized, poker tells operate on many levels. A player might shove chips in forcefully, hoping to make themselves look weak when he in fact holds a legitimate made hand. Know your opponent and how they are putting their chips on the table, because that is going to be a huge indication of what they're doing, what they're thinking, and what they're trying to make you think. The next area that we want to talk about is card apex. Card apex refers to the amount of time a player spends checking his whole cards after lifting the edge of his cards from the felt. This move is often overlooked, but professionals always know to pay attention to this. The length and frequency and even height of a card apex can often result in extra information regarding your opponent's hold. Opponents who constantly are checking their cards typically are trying to calculate the odds or figure out possible hand combinations. If a player is holding aces, they don't need to constantly be checking to see if they still have aces. Another important thing to consider with respect to the hands and body language is the idea of chip tricks. Ask yourself, what does a player do with their hands when they're not making a betting decision? Many players like to perform chip tricks while waiting for the action, but this can lead to trouble in some cases. What does it mean when a player who is always performing chip tricks suddenly stops? Of course, he might merely be giving his tired fingers a rest, but it could also be indicative of something more meaningful. Another thing to be considerate of is the idea of card protectors and other miscellaneous items. So if you want to avoid giving away any unsolicited information, we need to be completely conscious of all of our activities and make sure no patterns are giving us away. One commonly overlooked area is the use of card protectors. Card protectors are an object placed on top of the whole card to, number one, avoid their values being exposed, and two, to prevent the hands from being incorrectly mucked by an overzealous dealer. One thing that's very important to consider when it comes to card protectors and placing of tokens over your whole cards is the idea of consistency. If we always use a card protector, no problem. And if we never use a card protector, equally no problem. And in fact, hopefully you don't use card protectors because in my opinion, you look kind of foolish always putting some sort of magic token over your hand. The problem comes into play if sometimes we use a card protector and sometimes we don't. We need to be very careful that we're not giving away any unwarranted information. So if your opponent suddenly stops using a card protector in one isolated hand, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean? In my interpretation, it could mean that all of a sudden the player is probably thinking that the hand is not good and they're going to be throwing it away as soon as their option comes around. So, the most important thing to understand when it comes to body language is that the entire body can actually give us information. And as much as possible, we want to try to get a whole picture while working our way into our opponent's psyche. So think first of all about their normalized state. What are they like in their most relaxed stage? And then you can kind of work forward from there, kind of identifying when that behavior changes. So for example, with overall demeanor, you imagine for a second somebody who's very laid back, leaning, relaxed in their chair. They chat to the bar staff on the floor, order drinks or massages from girls with tattoos on their neck, but then suddenly they just hunch themselves forward and they're intensely focused on a hand. What exactly has happened that has caused this sudden change in their demeanor? We don't automatically know for sure, but if we were to guess, I would have to say there's something to do with the cards. Now, also think about mood for a second. We could know for someone at the table rather well. We know their mood, or we've been observing them for a while, okay? And then all of a sudden they start not acting their usual self. They seem short, moody. And this could all be as effect of a quick downswing in chips. We can often predict what changes certain emotions may have on a player's behavior. For example, if a player is tilted, meaning they've lost a lot of chips all of a sudden, they're more likely to do certain behaviors. Like for example, they might try to run a big bluff, or they also might be more inclined to make a call against a bigger bet. It's that simple. So in conclusion, it's good to remember that there is absolutely no tell that is foolproof, and you must always be analyzing your opponent in the context of their default state, or rather how they act when they're at their most relaxed, and then try to understand that their change in behavior is brought on by some sort of action causing a reaction. There are plenty of resources online which is going to give you some blanket statements such as, if your opponent hands tremble, that means that they're lying, or they're bluffing, or if an opponent's eyes move to the left, that means they're bluffing. But the truth is that psychology is a lot less black and white than that. You have to keep in mind that some players even consider themselves skilled actors, and they're going to attempt to deceive us with reverse tells. They will deliberately make their hands tremble or use some other physical tell in an attempt to deceive us and make us believe that this action was involuntary instead of deliberate and voluntary. So any tell could mean what we think it means, or it could mean the exact opposite. Understanding your opponent well is critical to ending up with that correct result. Hey guys, if you have any experience reading tells, or you happen to have a tick or a tell yourself, I want to give you some advice. Go see a therapist, because I can't help you. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead and leave it as a comment down below. And if you really like this channel, go ahead and clickety-clack that like button, and go ahead and punch that subscribe button if you haven't already. And you know, the most important thing is you're gonna have to ring, 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 ding, 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 that notification bell, because it's the only way that you're gonna guarantee to be notified every single time we upload one of these videos like this one, or any of the great tutorial videos we put up on the channel regularly. And remember, sharing is caring. And so I'm gonna ask you to make sweet love to that share button and give it out to all your friends. My name's Dominic, and this is the All-American Casino Guide reminding you, play responsibly.